The sound came before the pain, a single clean sound. And then Helena Voss stepped back and looked at what she had done with the expression of a woman who has finally solved a problem that has been annoying her for 18 months. She set the cleaver on the kitchen table. She did not look at Nora. She looked at the hand. The two smallest fingers of Nora's right hand lay on the scrubbed wood of the kitchen table like something that had always been separate from her, like something that had never belonged to her at all. The morning light came through the kitchen window in the particular indifferent way that morning light comes through windows, without opinion, without adjustment, illuminating everything equally and caring about none of it. Nora did not scream until she looked down, and then she did. Once. A single sound that left her body before she could decide whether to make it. Then silence. The particular silence of someone whose mind has not yet caught up with what their body already knows. Helena Voss picked up a length of clean linen from the kitchen shelf. She had placed it there before she began. She wrapped Nora's hand with the efficient and entirely impersonal care of a woman completing a task she had planned in advance and intended to finish correctly. She tied the knot. She stepped back. She smoothed her skirts. "A woman who cannot sign her name," she said quietly, "owns nothing." Then she went to find the cook, to send for the physician. Outside the kitchen window, on the road beyond the estate wall, a dark horse had slowed to nearly a stop, so that its rider sat with the particular stillness of a man who has heard something he cannot identify and is deciding whether to trust the instinct that has stopped him. James Calloway, Duke of Ashford, was not a man who ignored his instincts. He had learned over 36 years that they were considerably more reliable than most of the information people gave him voluntarily. He looked at the house for a long moment. Then he urged his horse forward and rode on. But he did not stop thinking about it. "Before we go any further, I need to stop and ask you something. How are you feeling right now? Because if the first 60 seconds of this story has already done something to your chest that you cannot quite name, then you are exactly where you are supposed to be. Thank you for being here. It means more than you know. Please hit that subscribe button, smash that like, and drop a comment below telling us where in the world you are watching from. Every single one of those actions reaches back to us. Every single one matters. All right, now let us go back to Nora, because what just happened in that kitchen is only the beginning of what her mother intended, and the Duke on that road has no idea yet what he is about to find out. Nora Voss had been painting since she was 4 years old, not the careful supervised painting of a Victorian girl taught watercolors as a social accomplishment. The flowers, the landscapes, the gentle pastoral scenes that decorated the drawing rooms of proper households and were admired and forgotten. Nora painted the way her father painted, and with the particular ferocity of someone who sees the world at a slightly different resolution than everyone around them and cannot rest until what they see is made visible to others. Edmund Voss had recognized it immediately. He had walked into the nursery one afternoon when Nora was 7 to find her sitting on the floor with his best sable brush and a pot of Prussian blue, painting a portrait of the housemaid on the back of a shipping receipt. The likeness was extraordinary. Not perfect. She was 7, but extraordinary in the way that certain things are extraordinary even in their imperfection, because the quality underneath the imperfection is genuine and unmistakable. He had stood in the doorway for a long time. Then he had gone downstairs and told Helena that Nora would be studying with him from the following Monday. Helena had said nothing. She had nodded. She had understood that this was not a request. Edmund Voss was not a man who made requests about things that mattered to him. He was a man who made statements and expected the world to arrange itself accordingly, which it generally did because he was exceptionally talented, and talent of that particular order tends to reorganize the rooms it enters. He had married Helena 12 years earlier in a moment of loneliness and poor judgment that he had spent the subsequent 12 years managing as gracefully as possible. Helena was not cruel in those years. She was simply cold in the way that some people are cold, not through malice, but through constitution, and as though the particular warmth that connects people to each other had simply been distributed unevenly at her formation, and she had received less than the standard measure. She managed the household with precision. She attended the correct social occasions. She smiled at the correct moments. She was, by every external measure, an entirely adequate wife to a man who needed very little from his marriage, because his marriage to his work was the consuming one. Nora grew up in the studio. She learned to stretch canvas before she learned to ride. She learned the names of pigments before she learned French. She learned to look, really look, there with the patient and systematic attention that separates a painter from a person who paints, before she learned most of the things that Victorian society considered essential to the formation of a proper young woman. Edmund taught her everything he knew without reservation, without the particular hesitation that some fathers feel when they realize their child has surpassed them. He felt no such hesitation. He was proud in the complete and uncomplicated way of a man who has made something genuinely good and knows it. He died in the spring of 1887. A stroke. Quick. The physician said he likely felt nothing after the first moment. Nora was at his bedside when it happened, and she held his hand and she did not let go for a very long time after. He left everything to her. The estate, the London studio, the paintings, and the commissions in progress, the substantial sum accumulated over a career of considerable success. He left it to Nora entirely and specifically, in language his solicitor, an honest man named Hargreaves, had drafted with unusual precision because Edmund had understood, with the clear-eyed practicality of a man who had lived with Helena for 12 years, that precision would be necessary. The inheritance required Nora's signature to transfer. A specific legal provision, standard for the period, that required the primary beneficiary to sign the transfer documents in the presence of 2 witnesses before the estate could be formally released from administrative hold. Helena read the will carefully. She read it 3 times. Then she sat very still in Edmund's chair in Edmund's study for a very long time, and she thought about the particular legal fact that a signature requires fingers, and she began to calculate. The cook's name was Mrs. Beatrice Fallow. She had worked at Voss Manor for 11 years. She was a woman of 52 with large, capable hands and the particular moral seriousness of someone who has spent a lifetime doing honest work and expects the same from the world around her. She was in the kitchen on the Tuesday morning when it happened. She did not see the moment itself. She heard it. The single clean sound that Nora would later describe as the thing that came before the pain. Mrs. And Fallow had been in the pantry doorway when the sound reached her, and she turned and she saw Helena stepping back from the table, and she saw the linen in Helena's hands, and she saw the table, and she understood immediately and completely what she was looking at. She ran, not away. She was not a woman who ran away from things. She ran toward the back door and out of it and down the path toward the village because she understood with the same immediate and complete clarity that what she had just witnessed required a physician and a witness and someone who was not inside that house and subject to Helena Voss's authority. Helena sent a stable boy after her with a message. The message said that Mrs. Fallow's services were no longer required at Voss Manor and that her belongings would be left at the gate. Mrs. Fallow went to her sister's house in the next village. She sat at her sister's kitchen table for 3 days without saying very much. On the 4th day, she began to talk. She talked for a long time. Her sister listened to all of it and said, "Someone needs to know about this." Mrs. Fallow said, "Yes, but who?" She did not know yet that the answer was already on its way. James Calloway had visited the Voss Gallery in London 6 weeks before the Tuesday morning. He had gone to commission a portrait. He had been told at the door by the curator, a thin, precise man named Mr. Aldgate, that Edmund Voss had died in the spring and that the gallery was managing the remaining inventory but was not accepting new commissions at this time. The Duke had thanked him and turned to leave and then stopped. On the far wall of the gallery, between 2 of Edmund's larger canvases, hung 3 paintings signed N. Voss. He crossed the room. The first was a landscape, the grounds of some estate in autumn, competent and beautiful, but not the thing that stopped him. The second was a still life of painting equipment, brushes, pigment jars, a palette still wet with color, painted with the particular intimacy of someone depicting objects they handle daily and love. Also, not the thing that stopped him. The third was a portrait, a woman reading by a window, afternoon light. The woman's face was turned slightly away from the viewer, absorbed in her book, entirely unaware of being observed, and the painting had the quality, rare, not teachable, either present or absent, of making the viewer feel they were seeing something true, not performed, not arranged, true. The Duke stood in front of it for 40 minutes. Then he went to find Mr. Aldgate. He learned that N. Voss was Nora Voss, Edmund's daughter, that she lived at Voss Manor in the county, that she had not been heard from since her father's death, and that the 3 paintings currently on the wall had been submitted to the gallery by Edmund himself in the months before he died. Submitted with the particular paternal pride of a man making sure the world knew what his daughter could do before he was no longer in it to tell them. The Duke wrote a letter to Nora at Voss Manor that same evening. It asked whether she would consider accepting a commission for a portrait. It said he would pay whatever rate she considered appropriate. It said he had stood in front of the woman by the window for 40 minutes and had thought about it every day since. He sealed it. He sent it. Helena Voss received it at the door of Voss Manor 3 days later. She read it in the hallway. She understood immediately what it meant. A duke. A commission. The world beginning to notice Nora in the particular way that once started tends not to stop. She put the letter in the fire. She stood and watched it burn. Then she went to the kitchen and looked at the cleaver on its hook on the wall, and she made her final calculation. If you have ever watched someone try to take from you the one thing they could not buy, stay exactly where you are. This story was written for you. And if you have not yet subscribed to this channel, please do it now. Hit that button. Turn on the notification bell. Because stories like this one take everything we have to build, and every subscriber is the reason we keep building them. Thank you. Now back to Nora. Because her mother has made her move. And she has no idea that the Duke is already asking questions. Nora's hand healed badly. Not through any failure of the physician. Dr. Marsh did what he could with what he had, which was considerable skill and insufficient information, because Helena's account of a kitchen accident was delivered with such smooth maternal anguish that he had no reason to question it. He cleaned the wound. He dressed it. He told Nora to rest the hand completely for 6 weeks and to expect permanent limitation of function in the remaining fingers of that hand from the trauma to the surrounding tissue. Permanent limitation of function. Nora lay in her room and looked at the ceiling and translated this into what it actually meant. She would never paint the same way again. The 2 missing fingers were the anchor fingers of her grip, the ones that steadied the brush during the long, sustained passages of fine work that portraiture required. Without them, the remaining fingers could hold a brush, could make marks, could approximate. But the particular quality of control that separated competent painting from the thing she did, the thing Edmund had recognized on the nursery floor when she was 7, that quality lived in the relationship between all 5 fingers and the brush and the eye, and that relationship was now permanently altered. She did not cry about this in front of anyone. So she cried about it alone at 3 in the morning with her damaged hand held against her chest, and the particular grief of someone who has lost something that was not a possession, but a capacity. Not something they owned, but something they were. By the 4th week, she was attempting to paint with her left hand. It was not the same. She had known it would not be the same. She had hoped the gap would be smaller than it was. It was not smaller than it was. The left hand was competent in the way that a person is competent in a language they learned in adulthood rather than childhood. Functional, careful, and missing the particular ease of something that has been practiced since before conscious memory. She attempted to paint with the remaining fingers of her right hand. The pain was considerable. The control was insufficient. And the results were not what she needed them to be. Helena watched these attempts from the doorway of the studio without commenting. After 2 weeks, she entered the studio and removed Nora's painting supplies, citing the physician's instructions about resting the hand. She removed access to the London studio, citing the complexity of estate management during the administrative hold. She engaged her solicitor, a man named Greer, whose relationship with honesty was flexible, and whose relationship with Helena's money was considerably more reliable, to begin the legal process she had identified 18 months earlier. The process was not simple. Helena was not a simple woman. The mechanism she and Greer had constructed was a specific legal argument that the administrative hold on Edmund's estate, having exceeded 12 months without the required signature from the primary beneficiary, constituted a de facto abandonment of claim under an obscure provision of the estate law that Greer had found, and that was genuinely present in the statute books, though it had never been successfully argued in court and had not been intended for circumstances of this kind. It was not a strong argument. It was strong enough to take time to defeat. And time was what Helena needed. Every week the legal process continued was a week during which the inheritance remained inaccessible and Nora remained trapped, and the world outside Voss Manor remained unaware of what had happened on a Tuesday morning in November. Ruth, the youngest of the house servants, was 16 years old and had worked at Voss Manor for 8 months and had not yet learned the particular household skill of not noticing things that were dangerous to notice. She noticed everything. She noticed the solicitor's visits. She noticed the documents Helena carried to her writing desk and locked in the lower drawer. She noticed the particular quality of satisfaction in Helena's expression at breakfast on the mornings after the solicitor had called. On a Thursday evening in December, she left a folded note outside Nora's bedroom door. 4 words. She has a solicitor. Nora read the note standing in the doorway of her room with her damaged hand held against her side. She stood there for a long time. She understood what it meant with the same immediate and complete clarity with which Mrs. Fallow had understood what she was looking at in the kitchen. Her mother was moving to claim the inheritance through a legal mechanism that did not require Nora's signature because it was designed to make Nora's signature legally irrelevant. She had no money of her own, no independent connections, no functioning painting hand, and no access to the London studio that was legally hers and practically inaccessible. She had Ruth's 4 words and the particular cold anger of someone who has been patient for a long time and has just discovered that patience has been mistaken for surrender. She was not finished. She did not know how to make that true yet. She did not know that 6 days earlier in London, James Calloway had sent his steward to make quiet inquiries in the county about Voss Manor and the woman who had not replied to 2 letters. The steward's name was Cooper. He was a man of 45, with the particular talent of obtaining accurate information from reluctant sources without making them feel they had been obtained from. He spent 3 days in the county. He spoke to the village physician, who told him about the kitchen accident with the careful neutrality of a man who has been told a story he accepted at the time and has been periodically uncomfortable about since. He spoke to 2 former Voss Manor servants who had left the household in the months following November and who told him things that the physician's neutrality had not prepared him for. He found Mrs. Fallow at her sister's house in the next village. Mrs. Fallow had been waiting for 11 weeks for someone to ask her the right question. She told Cooper everything: the pantry doorway, the sound. Then Helena stepping back from the table, the linen already prepared on the shelf. The cleaver sat down with the particular calm of someone who has finished a task. She told him about the solicitor's visits. She told him about the letter she had seen Helena burn in the hallway fireplace on a morning 3 days before the Tuesday. A letter with a ducal seal on the envelope that Helena had read and then fed to the flames with an expression that Mrs. Fallow had not understood at the time and understood completely now. Cooper returned to London. He reported to the Duke on a Monday evening in January in the Duke's private study, with a fire burning low in the hearth, and the particular quality of silence that descends on a room when information of a certain weight is being delivered into it. The Duke listened to all of it without interrupting. When Cooper finished, the Duke sat very still for a long time. Then he said, "Find me Hargreaves." Hargreaves was Edmund Voss's solicitor, the honest one. He came to the Duke's study the following morning and spent 2 hours reviewing the terms of Edmund's will and the current status of the administrative hold and the legal mechanism Helena and Greer were attempting to deploy. He was a small, precise man who became very still when he was angry, and he became very still approximately 4 minutes into the review. "This," he said, setting down the document and looking at the Duke with the expression of a man who has just been shown something that offends him at a structural level, "will not hold." "I know," the Duke said. "How do we prove it?" Hargreaves told him. It took 6 weeks. It's 6 weeks during which the Duke moved with the particular patience of a man who has decided that speed is less important than completeness, and that he will have only one opportunity to do this correctly and intends to use it properly. He engaged a barrister. He obtained Mrs. Fallow's sworn testimony, written, witnessed, and notarized at the office of a London solicitor entirely unconnected to Greer or Helena or anyone in the county. He obtained the village physician's account. The man had been uncomfortable about the kitchen accident story for 11 weeks and required very little persuasion to provide a written statement noting the inconsistencies between Helena's account and the nature of the injuries he had treated. He obtained Mr. Aldgate's written account of Edmund Voss's submission of Nora's paintings to the gallery and his stated intentions regarding his daughter's career. He obtained, through Hargreaves, a legal opinion from a senior barrister confirming that the administrative provision Helena and Greer were attempting to deploy had never been successfully argued in court, and that there existed, under an 1887 amendment to the Married Women's Property Act, an alternative mechanism for transferring the inheritance that did not require a written signature, but required instead a witnessed verbal declaration from the primary beneficiary delivered before a magistrate. Nora did not need her fingers. She needed only her voice. The letter arrived at Voss Manor on a Thursday morning in February. It was not addressed to Helena. It was addressed to Miss Nora Voss, and it was delivered by a man who was not the regular post and who waited at the door until Ruth, who had answered it, confirmed that she would place it directly into Miss Nora's hands and no one else's. Ruth carried it upstairs with the particular focused calm of someone performing a task they understand to be important. She placed it in Nora's hands. She stood in the doorway and waited. Nora read it. It was not long. James Calloway did not use more words than a situation required. It said that he had received information regarding the situation at Voss Manor that he found deeply troubling. It said that he had engaged solicitors to review the terms of Edmund Voss's estate and that he had identified a legal mechanism that would resolve the matter of the inheritance without requiring her written signature. It said that he had arranged for a proceeding before Magistrate Holloway at the county courthouse on the following Tuesday at 10 in the morning, and that his barrister would be present, and that Hargreaves would be present, and that the evidence he had assembled over the preceding 6 weeks would be presented in full. It said that Helena Voss and her solicitor Greer had also been summoned to the proceeding on a pretext that did not disclose its true purpose. It said, "If you are willing to speak one sentence before the magistrate, everything your father left you will be yours by Tuesday afternoon." And at the bottom, and in a hand that was precise and unhurried and entirely consistent, "I have been looking at the woman by the window for 4 months. I would very much like to meet the person who painted her." Nora read the letter twice. She looked at her damaged hand resting in her lap. The 2 missing fingers. The permanent limitation of function in the ones that remained. The hand that her mother had calculated would make her nothing. Owning nothing, signing nothing, claiming nothing. She thought about Edmund on the nursery floor, watching her paint a portrait of the housemaid on the back of a shipping receipt. She thought about the London studio that was legally hers and practically locked against her. She thought about the canvas she had stretched left-handed 2 weeks ago that was still blank because she had not yet found the courage to make the first mark on it with an unfamiliar hand. She folded the letter carefully. She placed it in the pocket of her dress. She looked at Ruth still standing in the doorway. "I will need something to wear on Tuesday," she said. "Something that belongs to me." Ruth nodded. She went to find it. The county courthouse on a Tuesday morning in February was not a place that expected drama. It was a room of moderate size with dark wood paneling and tall windows that let in a cold gray February light that flattered nothing and illuminated everything. A Magistrate Holloway, a man of 60, with the composed and slightly weary expression of someone who has spent 30 years administering justice in a county where justice was occasionally inconvenient for powerful people, sat at the front behind a wide desk. Hargreaves sat to the left, with a leather portfolio that was considerably thicker than anything Magistrate Holloway had been led to expect from the pretext on his calendar. The Duke's barrister, a tall man named Forsyth, whose reputation in London legal circles was such that Greer, when he entered the room and saw him, went immediately and perceptibly pale, sat beside Hargreaves. Helena Voss entered with Greer at 9:55. She was dressed with her customary precision, deep charcoal wool, jet brooch at the collar. The expression of a woman attending a routine administrative matter that she has already managed to her satisfaction. She saw Forsyth and her expression did not change because she was too disciplined for that. But something happened behind it. A recalculation, rapid and invisible to anyone not paying close attention. The Duke was paying close attention. He sat on the right side of the room with Cooper beside him and said nothing, and watched Helena's face for the 4 seconds it took her to complete her recalculation and reassemble her expression and take her seat. 4 seconds was enough. He had learned what he needed to know about how she would conduct herself in the next hour. Nora entered at 9:58. She wore dark blue wool, simply cut. Her damaged hand was gloved, not to hide it, she had decided. But because it was February, and the room was cold. Her dark hair was pinned simply. Her face was the face of someone who has spent 3 months in a burning house and has finally reached the door and is choosing not to run through it, but to walk. She sat down. She did not look at Helena. Helena looked at her for a long moment. Something moved across her face that she was not entirely able to control. Not guilt, Helena was not constituted for guilt, but perhaps the nearest thing to it that her formation permitted, which was the recognition that the thing she had calculated so carefully had not, in the end, been calculated quite carefully enough. Magistrate Holloway called the proceeding to order. De Forsyth presented the evidence in the order that Hargreaves and the Duke had determined would be most effective, beginning with the legal analysis of Helena and Greer's claim and its fundamental weakness under existing statute, proceeding to the medical evidence, then Mrs. Fallow's testimony, then the physician's statement, then Mr. Aldgate's account of Edmund's intentions for Nora's career, then the 1887 amendment and the alternative mechanism for transferring the inheritance. He was precise. He was thorough. He was finished in 40 minutes. Greer attempted a response. It lasted 11 minutes and convinced no one, including, visibly, himself. Magistrate Holloway read the documents. He read them carefully. He set them down. And he looked at Helena Voss over the top of his reading glasses with the expression of a man who has administered justice for 30 years and has seen most of what people do to each other for money and has not become accustomed to it. He looked at Nora. "Miss Voss," he said, "I will ask you to make the declaration." Nora stood. The room was very quiet. The February light came through the tall windows with its characteristic indifference. Helena sat perfectly still with her hands folded in her lap and her spine straight and her expression composed and the particular quality of someone who has built their entire life on the assumption that composure is the same as power and is discovering in this moment that it is not. Nora looked at the magistrate. She did not look at her mother. She did not look at the Duke. And though she was aware of him in the way that a person is aware of something that has traveled a considerable distance on their behalf and is now present in the room waiting to see if the distance was worth it, she said, "I am Nora Voss, daughter of Edmund Voss, and I claim in full the inheritance designated to me in my father's will, in the presence of these witnesses, under the provision of the 1887 amendment to the Married Women's Property Act." Her voice did not shake. She had decided it would not shake, and it did not. Magistrate Holloway made a notation. He signed a document. He passed it to Hargreaves. He looked at Greer with the flat and entirely unimpressed expression of a man who has just witnessed an attempt at legal manipulation that will have consequences for the license of the solicitor who attempted it. And he looked at Helena Voss one final time and said nothing because there was nothing that required saying. The document said everything. Helena stood. She walked out of the room with her spine straight and her expression composed and her jet brooch catching the February light at her collar. She was composed all the way to the courthouse steps. She was composed getting into her carriage. Whether she was composed once the carriage door closed was between herself and the interior of the carriage, and no one else would ever know. Greer's license was suspended by the end of the month. The legal proceedings against him for conspiracy and fraud would continue for the better part of a year and would conclude in a manner that satisfied Hargreaves enormously and that the Duke followed with the quiet attention of a man watching something he set in motion arrive at its correct conclusion. Nora stood outside the courthouse in the February cold for a moment before she went to find her carriage. The sky was the particular gray of a February morning that has no intention of improving. The street was ordinary. People moved along it with the ordinary purposes of a Tuesday morning in a county town, errands, appointments, the unremarkable business of ordinary life continuing in the complete indifference to the fact that something significant had just happened in the building behind her. She looked at her gloved hand, or she thought about what her father had said to her once, when she was perhaps 15 and had ruined a canvas and was sitting in the studio in the specific despair of a young painter who has destroyed something they were proud of. He had said, without looking up from his own work, that the painting was not ruined, it was revised, and that the difference between a painter who developed and one who did not was the ability to find the revision inside what looked like ruin. She had thought about this sentence many times in the preceding 3 months. She was thinking about it now. "Miss Voss." She turned. James Calloway stood a few feet away in a dark coat with his hands behind him and his gray eyes steady, and the expression of a man who has just watched something he worked toward for 6 weeks conclude correctly and is finding the conclusion worth the work. He was taller than she had imagined from the letter. She had not imagined him specifically, but she had formed some impression, and the impression had been shorter. "Your Grace," she said. A pause. The February wind moved between them. "I owe you an apology," he said. "The letter I wrote in November. I should have followed it with something more than a second letter when I received no reply. I should have come sooner." She looked at him. "You could not have known." "No, but I should have been more attentive to what the silence might mean." He paused. "I was not. I am sorry for the time that cost you." She looked at this man who had spent 6 weeks building a case for someone he had never met on the basis of a painting and a promise made to a dead man's memory. She thought about the letter, the woman by the window, 4 months. "You found Mrs. Fallow," she said. "She found me, in the sense that she was in exactly the right place when Cooper went looking." He paused. "She is a remarkable woman." "She is," Nora said. "She deserves better than what happened to her at Voss Manor. She has a position in my London household if she wants it. Cooper offered it to her this morning." Nora looked at him for a moment. He said this the way he apparently said most things, without performance, without the expectation of credit, and as though arranging a pension for a cook who told the truth was simply the obvious thing to do and required no particular acknowledgement. "The commission," she said. "The portrait you wrote about. Still open, if you are willing." She looked at her gloved hand. The permanent limitation of function. The 2 missing fingers that her mother had calculated would make her nothing. "I am painting with my left hand at the moment," she said, "and with the remaining fingers of my right when the pain allows. The results are not yet what I want them to be." "I am not in a hurry," he said. She looked at him. "You may be waiting some time." "I have been looking at the woman by the window for 4 months," he said. "I am accustomed to waiting for things worth waiting for." The February wind moved again. On the street continued its ordinary Tuesday business around them. "Then yes," she said. "When I am ready." He inclined his head. The slight, precise gesture of a man who has received something he values and is not going to make a performance of receiving it. They parted in the street outside the courthouse on a Tuesday morning in February, and the sky was still gray and indifferent, and the street was still ordinary, and Nora walked to her carriage with her damaged hand at her side, and the inheritance that was hers in the document that Hargreaves was carrying back to his office, and something else that she did not have a precise name for yet, but that felt, in the particular way of things that are beginning, like the first mark on a blank canvas. The commission began in April. Nora had spent February and March in the London studio that was now legally and practically hers. The keys delivered by Hargreaves on the Wednesday after the courthouse, the lock changed on the Thursday, the first morning she spent there simply standing in the middle of the space looking at her father's work and her own, and the particular quality of the light that came through the north-facing windows that Edmund had always said was the only light worth painting in. She had stretched a canvas on the Friday. She had made the first mark on Saturday morning with her left hand. It was not what she wanted it to be. She made another mark, and another. By the end of March, she had completed 2 paintings with her left hand and begun a third with both hands together, the left guiding, on the right contributing what it could within its permanent limitation. The results were different from what she had made before. Not worse, not better. Different in the way that things are different when they have been revised rather than ruined, carrying the evidence of what they have been through and making something of it, rather than concealing it. The Duke came for the first sitting in April on a Tuesday morning. He arrived precisely on time and accepted the chair she had positioned and sat in it with the composed stillness that she was beginning to understand was simply how he existed in the world, not performing calm, simply being it, the way certain people are simply the temperature they are without effort. She looked at him for a long time before she picked up a brush. This was standard practice. And Edmund had always said that the first 20 minutes of a portrait sitting were not painting. They were looking. You had to look until you understood not what the subject looked like, but what they were, and then the painting had somewhere to go. She looked at the gray eyes, the sharp angles of the face, the particular set of the jaw that she had come to associate, from the letter and the courthouse and the February street, with the expression of a man who has decided something and does not need to announce it. She picked up her brush. "You may speak if you wish," she said. "Some subjects prefer silence. Some find it uncomfortable." "I find it comfortable," he said, "though I have questions if you are willing." "Ask them." He asked about the painting, about how she approached a portrait, what she was looking for in the first sitting, and whether she worked from the face outward or from the composition inward, how the change in her hand had altered her process. He asked with the genuine curiosity of a man who finds the subject interesting, rather than the polite curiosity of a man making conversation. She answered honestly, more honestly than she had expected to, because there was something about the quality of his attention that made honesty feel like the obvious response. By the end of the first session, she had the underpainting and the beginning of an understanding of his face that she had not had when he walked in. He returned the following Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that. By the fourth session, they were not talking about the painting. They were talking about Edmund, about what it had been like to grow up in a studio, about the specific quality of the north-facing light and why Edmund had been correct about it, about the painting of the woman by the window, who she was, what Nora had been trying to do, whether she felt she had succeeded. "Do you?" he asked. "Feel you succeeded?" She looked at the canvas in front of her, at his face on it, beginning to be recognizable, beginning to be true. "I felt I was close," she said, "closer than anything I had done before, which is not the same as succeeding, but is the thing that makes you come back the next morning." He was quiet for a moment. "And now, with the hand as it is?" She looked at her left hand holding the brush, at the right hand resting in her lap. "I am closer to something," she said. "I do not know yet what it is. The paintings I am making now are not the paintings I would have made before November. They are different. I am still deciding whether different is better." "I think it is," he said. She looked at him. "You have not seen them?" "No. But I have been watching you paint for 4 Tuesdays, and I think whatever is happening in that hand is not diminishment." He paused. "I may be wrong. I am not a painter." "You are not wrong," she said. And then, just because the honesty that his attention produced in her was apparently unlimited, "That is the first time I have said that out loud." He looked at her with the gray eyes that she was in the process of painting, and that were considerably more difficult to capture than she had anticipated, because their quality was not in the color or the shape, but in the particular combination of steadiness and attention that she had not previously attempted to render, and was not yet sure she had the technical means to render correctly. "Good," he said simply. By the 6th session, she had looked at him enough to understand what she was painting. By the 8th, she had stopped pretending she was not aware of him in the particular way that she was aware of him. By the 10th, she had decided what she was going to do about it, and had decided to do nothing because she was not finished with the painting, and she did not trust herself to paint someone she was in love with as accurately as she painted someone she was simply looking at. She finished the portrait on the 12th Tuesday. She had him come on the Thursday to see it. He stood in front of it for a long time. She stood beside him and watched him look at it the way he had stood in the gallery and looked at the woman by the window. Completely, without performance, with the full weight of his attention. "Is it what you wanted?" she asked. "It is more than what I wanted," he said. "It is true." She looked at the painting, at his face on the canvas, at the gray eyes that she had spent 12 Tuesdays trying to render correctly, and had in the end rendered correctly not by understanding the color or the shape, but by understanding what was behind them. "Yes," she said. "I think so." He turned from the painting and looked at her. "Miss Voss," he said, "I have a second commission to propose." She looked at him. "Another portrait?" "A life," he said simply, "if you are willing." The north-facing light came through the studio windows with the particular quality that Edmund had always said was the only light worth painting in. And it fell across the canvases and the brushes, and the two people standing in the middle of the room looking at each other in the way that two people look at each other when they have both understood something simultaneously and are deciding at the same speed what to do about it. "I am not finished revising," she said. "Neither am I," he said. "I thought we might revise together." She looked at him for a long moment with the patient and systematic attention that separates a painter from a person who paints. The attention that does not rush toward a conclusion, but waits until the thing being looked at has revealed itself completely. What she saw was a man who had traveled from London to a county courthouse on a Tuesday in February for someone he had never met. A man who had found Mrs. Unfallow and given her a position and not mentioned it until asked. A man who sat still for 12 Tuesdays and asked genuine questions and did not require her to be anything other than what she was. A man who had said, "I am not in a hurry," with the absolute sincerity of someone who meant it. "Yes," she said, "I think we might." They were married in the summer in the London church nearest the studio because Nora had decided that the place she wanted to be married was the one that was closest to the work, and the Duke had said that seemed entirely correct to him and had arranged it accordingly. It was a small wedding. Hargreaves attended because he had earned it. Cooper attended. Mrs. Unfallow attended in a new dress that she wore with the satisfaction of someone who told the truth at considerable personal cost and is watching the correct outcome of having done so. Ruth attended, having accepted a position in the Duke's London household 3 months earlier and having settled into it with the particular relief of someone who has left a bad house and found a good one. Mr. Aldgate from the gallery attended because the Duke had thought to invite him and because he wept openly through the ceremony and was entirely unembarrassed about it. Nora's damaged hand was ungloved. She had decided this in the same way she had decided everything since February, not dramatically, not with announcement, simply as the correct thing. The hand was hers. The missing fingers were part of the account of what she had survived. She was not interested in presenting an edited version of the account to the people who had come to witness something real. The Duke held her hand during the vows with the particular care of a man who knows the history of what he is holding. Not gingerly, not with the performative tenderness of someone making a point, simply with care, the way he did most things, completely, and without any intention of doing otherwise. They left the church into a summer afternoon that was warm and generous and entirely indifferent to its own beauty, the way summer afternoons are. Helena Voss lived out her remaining years in a rented house in Bath. Nora had arranged a modest allowance for her through Hargreaves, not from guilt. She had spent considerable time examining whether it was guilt and had concluded it was not. Or it was from the particular clarity of someone who has decided that carrying hatred is a weight that costs the carrier more than the person it is directed at, and that she had other things to do with what she had. Helena accepted the allowance without comment. She did not write to Nora. Nora did not write to her. The arrangement was clean and impersonal and adequate, and that was all it needed to be. Greer's suspension became a permanent revocation of his license in the autumn of the year. He left the county shortly afterward and was not heard from in any context that mattered. Mrs. Fallow became, over the years, the most reliable person in the Duke's London household and the particular confidant of every junior member of staff who needed advice about anything. She gave advice freely and accurately and without making the recipient feel that they had been advised. Ruth became, in time, a woman of considerable practical competence who ran the household accounts with the same attention to detail she had applied to leaving forward notes under the doors of people who needed to hear the truth. Mr. Aldgate hung Nora's subsequent paintings in the gallery with the particular pride of a man who was present at the beginning of something and knows it. And Nora painted. She painted with her left hand and with the remaining fingers of her right. She painted differently than she had painted before November, slower, more deliberate, with the particular quality of someone who has learned that what looks like limitation can be revision if you are willing to find out what it is revising you toward. And the paintings she made in the years following the courthouse were considered by the people who knew such things to be among the finest portrait work produced in England in the late Victorian period. Edmund Voss's portrait hung in the London studio above the north-facing windows. Nora had painted it from memory in the first winter after the courthouse. A small canvas, not large, painted entirely with the left hand because the right was not yet ready. It was not technically her best work. It was the truest thing she ever made. The portrait of the Duke hung in the drawing room of their London house, where the light was good and where she could see it from her chair in the evening. She looked at it sometimes the way you look at something that cost you considerable effort and came out true and that you are not sorry you made. And the woman by the window remained in the gallery. People stood in front of it. Some of them stood for a long time. This is where Nora's story ends. Not in the kitchen on a Tuesday morning in November. not in the months of pain and limitation and the particular cold anger of someone whose capacity has been deliberately destroyed. It ends here, in a studio with north-facing light, with a brush in the hand that remains, and a life that is legally and completely and irrevocably hers. What Helena Voss did was not simply violent. It was precise. She looked at her daughter's gift and identified the physical mechanism through which it expressed itself, and she removed that mechanism with the calculated efficiency of a woman who had spent 18 months thinking about nothing else. She was not wrong that a signature requires fingers. So she was wrong about what Nora was, wrong in the way that people are wrong when they reduce a person to their function and forget that the person is larger than any single function they perform. Nora was not her fingers. She was the thing that had been painting since she was 4 years old, and that had survived everything the preceding decades had required of it, and that had found, in the revision that November forced upon it, not ruin, but a different kind of truth. The Duke did not save her. He recognized what had been done, and he built the case to answer it, and he stood in a courthouse in February and watched her speak one sentence in her own voice and claim what was hers. She had done that herself. He had simply made sure the room was there for her to do it in. There is a great deal written about resilience, and very little of it captures what resilience actually looks like in a real person, which is not dramatic heroism, but the quiet daily insistence on continuing, on making the next mark on the blank canvas, on finding out what the revision is revising you toward even when you cannot yet see the finished thing. Nora found out. The finished thing was worth finding. Thank you so much for staying to the very end. If this story moved something in you, if Nora's hand on that canvas stayed with you, if the Duke's patience felt like something the world needs more of, then please do one thing right now. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you have not yet. Leave a comment telling us where in the world you are watching from. Every single one of you matters to this channel more than you know. Until next time, keep making the mark. The right people will always recognize what is true.